Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I decided to use a video just to kind of mix it up a little bit. I'm a big fan of not a ton of PowerPoint slides, and I know it can be hard to sum up some of these chapters. So I decided to provide the bullet points or main ideas on the slide and then talk through some of the details to kind of do a change of pace and maybe break up the monotony. But Chapter 12 is about changing boundaries of adult and continuing education. It's kind of like a summation of all the previous lessons and where they are and where they could be. It reminded me a lot of the last two chapters. Um, but thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, make sure you reach out. One of the recurring themes of this class has been that adult education is not static. It's going to continually grow. It's going to have different factors that push and pull on the development, whether it be what's needed, whether it's identified gaps and shortfalls, or whether it's new technology and things like that. But it's going to continually move, and then because it is so dynamic that it's hard to just focus on single points, but it's easier to maybe break it down into trends or issues, and that's what this lesson does. Um, ACE is used daily in schools, community groups, business, and then things that we probably haven't really thought of, but like lecture-based was originated with ACE. Um, Along that is you have to think about the context of ACE. Professional is pretty clearly identified, and that's formal and non-formal work improvement methods and strategies. Personal, people identifying things that they want to do, whether it be knitting, motorcycle riding, or skills that they're lacking in, like reading or financial awareness. But there's also social ramifications, thinking about as societies try to produce something better left and right of them. We help each other out and we build these bonds and we think about that. So I'm going to go ahead and go through the next couple of topics that this lesson covered and try to elaborate a little bit more on the things that I noticed and thought about in the reading. First topic I'm going to go over can be classified as adult learner dilemmas, and these are some things that are unique to dealing with adult learners. Number one at the top of the list is motivation and participation. As adult learners, you're typically going to see everyone having their own reasons, just like we talked about all the different reasons that adult learning is relevant in today's society. They can be personal, professional. Sometimes they can be pushed upon the learner, and that greatly affects what they're going to bring to the table and how they're going to do things. I experience that personally. I teach adults, and sometimes they don't want to be there, and it can be very difficult. You either have to establish relevance, or you have to kind of establish some type of buy-in, or bridge that motivation gap. After that, you have to think about the learning process, and that's one thing with adult learners is that they're less adaptable. They generally have learning preferences and styles, um, and some prefer individual, some prefer group activities, but these types of things have to be identified by the instructor and approached. Typically, we we've focused on the blending of these so that you don't alienate any group of students. Um, but one recurring trend, whether it be in all of these and it relates to motivation and participation, is that we're looking at self-directed learning. The adults typically do not have to be here, and they can push to other directions. Um, and then lastly, we need to think about learner and cognition. And then learner is a pretty easy word to identify, but cognition is basically the mental action or process of acquiring knowledge and understanding through thought, experiences, and senses. And that's one thing we can leverage in adult education is the learner's experiences. And if you think about in sixth grade, eighth grade, 10th grade, 12th grade, if a student said, in my experience, more often than not, it's very secluded and compartmentalized and doesn't have much diversity. But if you think about in the later years of college and graduates and postgraduate work, That sentence could go into any myriad of different experiences that could add to everyone's learning environment. So that's definitely different. Is understanding that the learner brings different things, along with having different goals inside the education environment. The next trend that I'm going to touch on is titled Diversity and Changing Knowledge Base. Here it is our duty to understand that our student populations, socially and just about every other demographic, are going to continue to be um, more non-traditional. I think is one of the more politically correct ways to say it, whether it be the LGBTQ community, whether it be different nationalities, whether it be increase in immigration that might change who you're talking to, or also in some instances may even change how you're teaching or what you need to cover. Um, as we get more away from traditional Western ideas, philosophies. This is called globalization, or the movement of goods, services, and information across national boundaries. It's in the news a lot, and it's a very hot topic. You can Google it, and you can see that some people are for it. They think a smaller world makes a better community, and then some people think that it dilutes that what is good. That might be on the quiz that's coming up at the end as a hint, hint. Um, but as well, it's understanding that inside your educational environment, there's going to be social learning. And social learning is those students observing other students, thinking about and taking in their ideas and perspectives for critical thinking and the like. So, understanding these kind of new dynamics, it's a hot word this chapter, or changes, is important to having a good adult learning environment. The next subtopic is going to be thinking about the structures and organization, and that's pretty straightforward. But the structures, what are the institutions that support the adult continuing education that you are focused on? And this is in its plainest sense structurally, how and where is it being taught? All those physical environments, what do we need, whether it be books, electronics, etc. And that's going to be sometimes based off the task at hand, and then also the entity which is providing the education, whether it be a school or a job or some type of church, community center, or the like. And then what are they trying to accomplish? What's their function, whether it be English as a second language, whether it be training of a new skill, whether it is remediation on poor performance. Um, and when thinking about how we improve that process, we have to identify what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and in terms of someone who has worked in adult education, I think the most dangerous phrase can be, "That's what we've always done," because it's easy, especially anybody that's delivered material several times, is it's easy just to continually push forward with what you're doing, especially if by standards it works. So we have to think about that. Is there a better way, even if it might be harder to implement or develop? Next up is going to be what I think is the most important trending issue, or area to stay up to beat on, is the technology field. Traditionally, technology is continually important inside adult education because it does so much. It's what's in the military called a force multiplier. It lets you do more with less. One instructor could feasibly teach hundreds of people through a MOOC, or a massive open online course. A lot of times those aren't generally too expensive, sometimes even free to the public. Those have gone on from basic skills to advanced topics to technology education, how to use technology, which a lot of the older adult education students need, is they need to be spun up on newer skills or variations, especially if they're trying to find better employment. But habitually, because adult education has less constraints than your normal school environment, there's less regulations. While that hurts it in a few instances, it allows for more innovation, and it allows for educators to think outside the proverbial box. One important piece, if you're understanding this, is the National Education Technology Plan, or NETP. The NETP has been concerned with the use of technology in schools, but as of recently, it was written in 1996, but it's continually revised. But as of recently, it's focused a lot more on ABE, or adult basic education. So if you remember from 2 lessons ago, that is the education environment for those students needing basic literacy, basic mathematical literacy, things like that. So think students who did not get their GED or are not proficient in high school level um, rudimentary education. The NETP has been concerned with how are we going to use technology to leverage this area and to educate more adults. They've looked into the usage of MOOCs, and they actually feel like we should invest in those, and then also, in addition, typically in those massive courses, you go through lecture series, you download things. It's very self-paced. There's very little feedback. It calls for more feedback for those students that are participating in them to better educate them. One important factor to think about in any type of subjective delivery, especially with education, are the standards, credentialing, and accountability. So when we speak to standards, we're talking more specifically about college and career readiness standards. So what level are the classes being delivered to? What is good? What is bad? What is enough? What is not enough? Um, and these CCR, college and career readiness, again, um, a lot of these standards, which were put in place by the government, mirror the actual Common Core standards that students are getting. Now, those closer relate to ABE, adult basic education, as discussed. Um, but in terms of like professional and work environments, um, we also need to look in terms of what are the certificates being earned, and especially what immediately comes to mind is the IT world. If you've ever dealt with your IT guy, at the end of his email signature, he has 15 letter combinations that all mean different things that they're trained in. The Lumina Foundation in 2015 found that in the past 30 years, there has been an 800% increase in the number of certificates offered to adults, or earned, excuse me, by adults in the workforce. So where is the redundancy there? Are we providing certificates and credentials for very simple tasks that have almost become standard for the course? If you think about that, in your work environment, do certain people all have the same thing? If so, is that certification necessary, and so forth? Are we wasting time, money, specifically, and effort to earn these when they are no longer needed? And then lastly, one of the more important things to think about too is accountability. So if we have all these entities running different types of professional development with different types of adult education, just as mentioned previously, the looseness allows for innovation. It can also result in a less effective product. So these areas have the most, I don't want to say, discussion about how do we gauge this, how do we gauge effectiveness, how often are students of these programs being tested, and if so, tying back into the previous 2 bullets, is to what standards. Focusing now on different international organizations, again, it's important to think past our kind of Western compartmentalized lives. Um, Here's a hint: is one of the major players in international organization is UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Basically, what they did, they were founded in 1945, so post World War II, and their ideology is that through connections among diverse people, Um, Peace is easier to establish and maintain. So if you understand your neighbors and you've worked with them, it is kind of preemptively fighting possible conflict in the future. And they have focuses that they go about educating and bringing people up to date on, and then spreading information and encouraging and funding projects across nations. Right now, they're focusing on Africa as a developing continent, and getting them up to speed on where they have fallen behind, and then also gender equality, which, as we know, globally isn't as prevalent as it is here in America. Um, but they go about and they put these projects together, and they look to educate adults all over the world. The next major player that the book discussed was the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. This started as a, again, post World War II Europe and America project, but they incorporated Japan later on, and they focus on improving the work related skills of the people that they help. So you can kind of see, post World War II, they were rebuilding Japan as well, coming in with the near peers around the world. They focused on bringing them up to speed and sharing information and skills and getting those adult relevant skills for the workplace. And then the last one, I think the one that we've probably heard the most about, is the World Health Organization, and they do projects from sexual responsibility and health to basic cleanliness to disease prevention to water purification, and the list goes on and on. And these are examples of adult education when it comes to basic skills which are needed and not necessarily understood all the time. That kind of wraps up all of the topics covered in this chapter, and then it was unique in that the summary also was probably the shortest summary out of all the chapters, but it also included the overview of the book. It basically just reminded everybody that adult education is going to continue to grow, along with the need for adult education, whether it's emerging technology that needs to be trained on, whether it's bringing education to certain areas, or revamping certain workforces, or helping those who are not able to attend regular traditional education. Um, and then reminding us again that the lenses on adult education could be socially, it could be professionally. So it's such a broad topic. We need to remember the individual areas that it can fall into, and that it's also a worldwide movement, that it's not exclusive to small town USA, or um, what we might think about when how is it applied. As mentioned in the last slide, classes on ways to boil water, and um, what happens if you don't use contraceptives, and all these things that we kind of take for granted because they're embedded into our everyday lives, have a place in adult education, along with how to use Microsoft Office. I mean, that's the spectrum that we're dealing with when we're talking about adult education, and how to think about ways of improvement. I hope you've enjoyed this non-traditional approach to the lesson delivery, and that it was a little bit easier for you to sit back and relax, and look forward to seeing you in the discussion boards and in future classes. Have a great day.